South Sudan's rivals gather for talks even as fighting on the ground intensifies. Rebels are now in control of two major states, with President Salva Kiir declaring a state of emergency. So, can diplomacy solve an ever-increasing crisis in South Sudan? Or is the situation already out of control? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir declared a state of emergency in parts of the country on Wednesday. Now, the order covers the states of Unity and Jonglei, where there's been fighting over the past month. The crisis began when President Kiir sacked his deputy Riek Machar, along with most of his cabinet last July. But what may have begun as a power struggle between the two men soon turned into a violent conflict between their supporters. At least 1,000 civilians have been killed so far, and nearly 200,000 people are displaced as the humanitarian crisis worsens. Now, the United Nations is calling for an immediate truce as the two sides prepare for peace talks in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. So far, neither side are backing down, and the head of the UN mission in South Sudan has warned of the dangers of continued fighting.
We have seen terrible acts of violence in the past 2 weeks. There has been killings and brutality, grave human rights violations and atrocities committed. We have seen evidence of apparent ethnic targeting of South Sudanese citizens on ethnic grounds. This can lead to a perpetual cycle of violence that can destroy the fabric of the new nation. We need to do everything possible to prevent such a cycle of violence between the communities of South Sudan.
And before we bring in our guests, let's take a closer look at the current conflict. As we mentioned a little earlier, President Kiir sacked his deputy Riek Machar in July last year. Last month, he accused him of attempting a coup, which led to fighting among their supporters. Machar denies the accusation, saying Kiir is violently purging his opponents. The violence has spread across the country, with rebels seizing control of several areas in the oil-rich north. Now, the conflict has also been marred by a surge in ethnic violence, pitting members of Kiir's Dinka tribe against Machar's Nuer community. Now, let's bring in our guests now. In the South Sudanese capital, Juba, we are joined by Barnaba Marial Benjamin. He is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Sudan. While in London, Choul Laam is the Chief of Staff to the Secretary-General of the SPLM, and that's short for Sudan People's Liberation Movement. Here in Doha, Aly Verjee is here, and he's a senior researcher at the Rift Valley Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Aly Verjee, if I may start with you, and if you could perhaps give us the big picture here. 2 years ago, South Sudan was born, full of potential, resources and hope. Where did it all go wrong?
I think that potential is still there. South Sudan can still be a successful country, but it requires leadership that is prepared to do that. And so on both sides of the current dispute between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, both sides need to find it within themselves to remember what it is to have a South Sudanese nation and what South Sudan can be and what can be done to restore or deal with the damage of the last few weeks and the fighting that's occurred.
And there is a lot of optimism over the negotiations that's expected to take place in Addis Ababa. But before we get to that, I want to throw this next question to Choul Laam. Now, is this an ethnic conflict with political overtones, or is this a political conflict exploiting deep ethnic tensions?
What we have in South Sudan is a conflict, whether it's political or ethnic. We have a conflict, and what we need to do is to try and to stop it as quick as possible. Now, the only way to do it is through dialogue, and I see that I commend President Kiir and former Vice President Riek for accepting to send delegation. This is a good start, but that's not where it would all be resolved without actually having a comprehensive dialogue, and that means bringing everybody who can change the situation and ensure peace in South Sudan, and that is through releasing of the detainees who represent the wide country, and they're from all part of South Sudan. And I believe these gentlemen have the power to try to resolve the current situation in South Sudan.
Now, Barnaba Marial Benjamin, it has been said that the South Sudan government is basically targeting its ethnic rivals. Is this true?
That is not absolutely true. What had actually happened was an attempted coup after the failure of political solutions within the party. And former Vice President Dr. Riek Machar actually instigated within the presidential cards an attempt to take over the government, an elected democratic government by force. So there's no ethnic intention, because the Sudan People's Liberation Army is an army that contains a whole sector of the South Sudanese ethnic communities. And it is the national army of the country. It has got the constitutional mandate to defend the sovereignty and the constitution of this country. It is indeed unfortunate that the former vice president begins to recruit within its own ethnic group and agitating some members of the ethnic group within the national army, and that what brings the ethnic dimension. But I must say, yes, it's a struggle for power. And as we all know, we have a constitution that allows any South Sudanese to become the president of this country through the ballot box. And I think that is the only way that if former vice president would like to be the president of this country, he should have waited until the elections of 2015. He could either contest, if he has failed to get the chairpersonship of the party, of the ruling party, he has the other option of forming either his own party or competing as an independent candidate for presidency. It shouldn't have led to his rebellion as we see it today.
Now, I just want to bring in Aly Verjee back into the discussion here. Now, Aly Verjee, we've been saying here that this is a struggle for power. Is this a struggle between these two men, between Riek Machar and between the president of South Sudan? Or is this, could we have put in two different men and this would not have been the case as well?
It's difficult to say. I think the responsibility for what's happened does have to rest on both the current president and the vice president, the former vice president. It's a hypothetical to discuss if other leadership had been there, but I think and I hope that both leaders can recognize that, you know, while there may have been faults committed on both sides, and it's not to say that they're equivalent in those faults, but that it's time to try and contain this before it gets any worse.
Certainly, and certainly there are efforts that will be taking place later in this week when negotiations take place in Ethiopia. Now, Barnaba Marial Benjamin, now both sides have agreed to come to the negotiating table. In the meantime, though, government troops vow to recapture Jonglei and Unity states. This doesn't seem to bode well for peace talks.
Well, as you know, that the IGAD countries had initiated 4 principles upon which this political issue could be resolved. But we must equally understand that the President Kiir is the elected President of the Republic under our constitutional establishment. And what is happening is that the forces of Riek are in fact attacking the positions where the government is in control. And this is a rebellion. It is incumbent on the constitutional authority of this country to protect its sovereignty and to maintain law and order, to protect its citizens and their properties. So really it is not the government that is on the offensive, it is the government positions being attacked that has been empowered by the constitution of this country.
Now,
as you said, it is not true it is not true that to say both the Unity State and Jonglei State are under full control of Dr. Riek's rebels. What has happened is that the capital of Unity State, yes, they are in, but the rest of the state has the presence of the government, as well as in Jonglei State, they are in Bor and people are fighting in the same place. And that's why the state of emergency was issued by a legal constitutional government so that the law and order could be brought into place. And of course, Dr. Riek, of course, has refused any cessation of hostilities, and he goes on the attack.
Well, I want to
It's
bring
the
up that
government
point
duty to defend
with
itself,
Choul Laam
and
now in London. Now, Choul Laam, we do know that part of the rebel army includes the very controversial ethnic militia, the White Army. How optimistic are you that this certain part of the army, the White Army, can be held, can be brought in to line and be able to observe a ceasefire if it's called for in order for negotiations to take place?
I would just like to clarify maybe a point or two that my view is under South Sudanese view as citizen of South Sudan, or also as a concerned citizen, and I'm not representing neither the government nor the rebel. But what I would like to say about that is that there will be more of these type of offenses against the government from the whole country if it's not contained. Because what will happen basically is that people will take sides based on the tribal lines or based on the ethnic lines. Now the Nuer, the White Army, majority are all from Nuer, and they came in aid of their fellow citizen, and also try to take response now on the claims or the rumors or of what took place in Juba back on the 15th of December or on the 16th of December. And there will be a lot of kind of positions like that made by any other group that feels that they were under attack. So based on that, we need to understand that what South Sudan needs at the moment is a national reconciliation. And that is based off involvement of every South Sudanese national and all people that are the elders, religion leaders that can come in stake of saving the country. This is not about Riek Machar anymore. This is not about Salva, but this is about the country. History has proven to us that many good leaders come and go, but the country remains. And the people need to understand that without us uniting as one people, we'll always have problems like this arising from our country. We are barely 2 years, and we have a lot to achieve in terms of trying to narrow the gap and looking at all of us as one people. Now, nobody chooses what tribe they come from. This is something that we're all born into it. And we have the choice to either appreciate each other based on where we come from, or we could try to look at our differences, which can create such incidents and situations.
All right. Now, given the gap, as you mentioned, the political gap and the ethnic gap that exists in South Sudan, Aly Verjee, how much optimism is there over these coming talks in Addis Ababa?
I think we have to hope that both sides find it within themselves to find peace, or at least as a start to find a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities. Let's remember that the real victims of what's happened in the last few weeks, is not the president, nor is it Riek Machar. It's the citizens and the civilians of South Sudan displaced or killed or otherwise affected. So they're the real victims. So I think we should be optimistic and hope that the mediators can find the possibility for a ceasefire. But the talk shouldn't end there. There needs to be more than that. There needs to be this idea of reconciliation as well, but also accountability for what's gone on, and perhaps a recognition that personal political ambitions should not hold a nation hostage.
Indeed. Well, let's go on that line about accountability. And I want to throw this question to Choul Laam. Now, we know that talks will go ahead. We know that it's one thing to sit at a negotiating table, to sit and smile for the cameras and to abide by international pressure to try to find some sort of ceasefire and some sort of national unity. But then again, will people be held accountable? Or how optimistic are you that people will be held accountable for the current atrocities that are happening?
In history, we have learned a lot of great unfortunate events that took place, such as in South Africa. Now, at the moment, it's not about justice, it's not about accountability, but rather it's about finding peace in South Sudan, ceasefire and national reconciliation. Now we could come back later to trying to go through the books and trying to find out who did what and find them accountable for their act. But at the moment, I think if we put justice before peace, then we will have a scenario of that we will look always of who did what, and we cannot narrow the gap that we have in between. Now, this is the same situation that's happening in South Sudan at the moment. We have 11 politicians that represent the whole country. These men, in my view, and many of South Sudanese view, that maybe the government is seeing that it is time to serve justice and hold them accountable for their act. But in other view, we could always see that these men can narrow the gap. They could bring an end to what's happening in South Sudan at the moment by encouraging national reconciliation. And maybe even if they go to Addis Ababa, they will not be representing Riek or nor Selva, but rather South Sudan in general. And these men, I believe, have a lot at stake, and we should look into more of peace rather than justice. We can always get back to justice. Now, in December, we lost great men, Nelson Mandela, who had been served with a lot of unfairness, being imprisoned for 27 years. But upon his exit, he became the president, and he also taught the world of how to forgive.
Mm-hmm. Now,
this time now is about
I just need to move on the discussion. Barnaba Marial Benjamin, I want to give you time too to answer to that question. Will there be peace before justice? Do you think people will be held accountable for the current atrocities?
I can assure you that the delegation that the President Salva Kiir had appointed is not only of the ruling party of the SPLM or the government alone. It includes all different political parties in the Republic of South Sudan in order to give it a national character, a representation of the identity of this country in its all diversity. That indicates that its seriousness, that there must be a political settlement, and indeed that the suffering of the people of South Sudan should come to an end. And we know that President Salva was elected democratically. Over 93% of our people in this country gave him the vote, and it was President Kiir on his own choice, given to him by the choice of our constitution, to choose his running mate. And that's how Dr. Riek Machar became his vice president. So the government is committed to finding a peaceful solution. That's why at the IGAD meeting, the president endorsed the 4 principles. One, it endorsed the fact that there should be the talks between the government and the rebel group, the attempted coup group, without any preconditions. And that secondly, there must be cessation of hostilities so that our population should not continue to suffer because they have suffered for so long. On the issue of those who have been detained, yes, in principle, the president and the government said, yes, the release of these detainees shall be considered within the laws of the Republic of South Sudan. But remember, we have a constitution, and if somebody breaks the law, even if the president was to give pardon, which he has done so many times, with a lot of amnesty, on the principle that we need reconciliation in this country, we need peace in this country. That's why President Salva had to agree with a lot of militia groups to bring them within the government so that the people of South Sudan can live in harmony.
Right.
So I believe it is in the government interest and on behalf of the people that definitely we are serious. That's why you have a 19 persons delegation that is now in Addis in order to discuss these issues seriously and to guarantee one thing, and that is the principles upon which President Salva has been running this democratic country, that no to war and yes to peace. Right. And on that basis, that crowns the importance of having dialogue. Indeed, accountability is important. Of cases which have been reported of having abused human rights within the National Army, we have already, the government has already taken steps. As I speak to you, they have been identified, they will be investigated, and they will be punished. The worry is the area where Dr. Riek has actually brought up sort of an ethnic-based type of rebellion, where there are also a lot of human rights abuses. We believe he has no command and control to see that this ethnic violence in the side in which he is in charge is stopped. But on the side of the government, yes, we will hold accountable those who abuse
that's certainly
and who are
very
used
good to
ethnic
hear.
card.
That's certainly very good to hear, Barnaba Marial Benjamin. I am going to have to move on the discussion and bring in Aly Verjee again. Aly Verjee, going ahead to 2015, given the current ethnic political division that we have in South Sudan, What does this say for the 2015 polls?
Well, of course, those elections, I think, are somewhat in doubt as part of what's happened now, and there's something that probably must be discussed within the national context to see whether the election should happen in 2015, and if so, when. I think, you know, it's incumbent on both President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar to very carefully consider their political ambitions and whether their political ambitions are necessarily in the interest of all of South Sudan and all of South Sudanese. And so I think, you know, it's not necessarily the time to talk about elections and who should be a candidate and all of that sort of thing. We need to address the issues that are in front of us now, and that's first averting a humanitarian disaster. It's in terms of stopping the fighting that's going on, and in terms of looking towards a future for South Sudan that includes all South Sudanese.
Right. Aly Verjee, is it safe to say 2 years on after South Sudan was born that it is actually a failed state? Perhaps it's time to bring the United Nations in, the UN troops in order for them to actually lay down the foundations of proper political systems, infrastructure.
Well, the UN has been in South Sudan for quite a long time, even before it was independent. I don't think that's necessarily the solution. South Sudan is not a failed state, but it is a state that has a lot of weaknesses, and it's a state that needs a lot of help. So now is not the time for it to be abandoned or written off as a place that doesn't work. The fact is that there is a common identity that can be built upon if South Sudanese leadership chooses to build upon that. I think most South Sudanese are horrified by what's happened in the last few weeks, and they really hope that their government and their leaders can do better in future. So I think the international community has a role to play, but ultimately the primary role is going to be with the South Sudanese themselves.
Right, we're just running out of time, gentlemen. I want to give you one last thoughts. Choul Laam, what do you hope will come out of these talks?
I'm hoping for more engagement of stakeholders, people that could come and make this more of a solution, an all-out solution, rather than a solution between two people, Riek and Salva. So I believe if we have the courage, in which I'm hoping our government will have the courage of releasing and involving other people who can bring and narrow the gap, that will be good for South Sudan, as well as for the East African community in the IGAD. I think having a positive outlook into the matter, rather than I guess maybe looking at it one way or another negative input into South Sudan's issue, is not helpful at the moment. There's a lot of discussion of others who have came in and made statements which I don't think could help South Sudan. We need dialogue at this time. We need positive input, and also we need to help all the children of South Sudan who might be scattered, who might be ill, who might be serious hunger and scared outside in the bushes, and most that are in UN camps. This is their country, and they should be safe, they should feel happy, and they should be considered in their own country, rather than fleeing and looking for shelters.
And Barnaba Marial Benjamin, the last word goes to you. How optimistic are you that some resolution will come out of these talks in Addis Ababa?
I can assure you the President Salva Kiir and the government of the Republic of South Sudan has the constitutional right to see that the people of South Sudan are at peace and enhance their development. South Sudan is never a failed state. It wouldn't be. Up to now, South Sudan, big as France, has managed to establish institutions that are working. And may I remind you, in all cases, you have seen the case of Angola, what happened in Sabimbi and the day. You have seen that even in South Africa, where the icon was when Buthelezi was fighting seriously the Mandela's government. And so is Mozambique as we speak. It has happened in Zimbabwe, Shangarai and Mugabe. We have seen it in Kenya, what happened. So really, this is an incident within the historical sort of dynamics of this continent. But I can assure you, the government has the confidence and the ability that this issue will be brought to an end, because it is in the interest of this young nation that has done so much in such a short time, that we will be able to overcome it, reconcile, build our nation, and become a part of the civilized nations of this world. And that is our hope, and that is our motto, and that is our vision. And I believe we will achieve it.
And we're certainly very optimistic too. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Thanks to my guests there, Barnaba Marial Benjamin, Choul Laam and Aly Verjee. And thank you too for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, you can always email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.